Okay. Morning, everyone, and welcome to Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules, January 8th, 2025. We have a full agenda today, so I want to get right to it. But before we get started, let the introduction starting to my left.
I'm Bradley Showman, interning with the Office of Legislative Counsel.
Representative Mark Kigley from the Orleans-Lamoille District.
And Senator Rob Plunkett, Bennington District.
Larry Sackwitz from Randolph, Representative.
Seth Converse, I represent the Bennington Senate District.
Good morning, Senator Dave Weeks, representing Rutland County.
Yeah, I'm Representative Trevor Squirrel. I represent Underhill and Jericho, and
Lindsay Shaw here, Committee Assistant.
Amy Leonard, Office of Legislative Counsel.
the senator is just coming in.
They're back. Sorry, I'm late. Person in front of me had a velocity problem this time.
Okay, first item on the agenda are the minutes from 3:25. I motion to. Okay, any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you. All right, so first up on the agenda today is Rule 25, EO2, Emergency Rule, Manufactured Food Emergency Rule, and Jessica Schifano. Someone on Zoom?
Yes, she's here.
Jessica?
Good morning, committee.
That's Jessica. Oh, Jessica Schifano.
Jessica, you're up.
Great, thank you so much. I appreciate you giving us the time today. So good morning, Chair Squirrel and committee members. My name is Jessica Schifano, and I'm the Policy Director for the Department of Health. You heard from us in your last meeting on December 3rd about our formal manufactured food rule, and you approved our final proposed rule. And that rule, as you will remember, was intended to make the emergency rule that we filed on July 1st and that you approved on August 7th permanent when the emergency rule expired on December 28th. Due to a clerical error in filing that final adopted rule, the effective date of the final adopted rule was delayed until January 15th. So we have filed this emergency rule that you're considering today to ensure that the manufactured food rule didn't lapse between the expiration of the previously filed emergency rule and the effective date of the final adopted permanent rule. What you're considering today doesn't make any changes and is the same as both the previously approved manufactured food emergency rule and the formal rule. Once the final adopted rule that you approved on December 22nd is effective, it will replace this emergency rule that you're considering today. And that will happen on January 15th. So happy to answer any questions that you all have.
When is the final rule effective?
That it will become effective January 15th.
Okay. Does everyone understand what's happening here? Basically, it's clerical error. I'm sorry?
Gets us through a week.
Okay. All right, so do I have a motion?
So move.
So moved, okay. There's a motion to approve 25 EO2, the Department of Health Manufactured Food Emergency Rule. Any more discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, next up we have Rule 25 P20, Agency of Transportation Regulations covering use of state highways that limit access facilities. As you remember, it's part of one of several rules that we heard at the last meeting. But apparently with some changes that were with this rule, you needed to go back to, I think, traffic committee for approval. So that's where we are. So floor is yours.
Thank you. For the record, Ian Jaguda, State Traffic Engineer with the Agency of Transportation and the Traffic Committee Coordinator. I am not a member of the Traffic Committee, but they've authorized me to advance these rules on their behalf. So as the chair said, this is the rule that the committee saw at the meeting of December 3rd. But there were some minor technical changes that had to be formally approved by the Traffic Committee before it could be approved by Lcar. The Traffic Committee has since approved those technical changes. There is one slight additional change that is really a formatting thing. There were some section and roll numbers that we'd removed to try to clean it up, but the Traffic Committee requested we reinstall those or reinstate those to simplify the use of the rule by law enforcement officials, just make sure it's easier, less chance of making an error when they're citing the rule. So this returns those numbers as they had been in the previous version. So it's primarily a formatting thing. Otherwise, the rule is as you saw in December. Happy to take questions, but want to be respectful of your time.
That change that was requested, did that come through you, Damien, or?
I've reviewed it. Did you submit a memo with the change?
Yeah, there was a memo submitted
Okay.
with the articles and sections, and I think you'd coordinated with Evangeline on that.
Okay. I don't have the memo in front of me. What I would recommend is that the motion is that you approve the rule as amended by the memo submitted on December 2nd and changes recommended by the Traffic Committee during today's hearing. And then what it really is if you look at your marked up version, they struck out Article 1 in front of each rule in Article 2, and they put that back in because law enforcement, when they cite this, cite Article 1, Section whatever. And so it just clarifies for law enforcement going forward that they haven't changed the title of the rules. So it is in purely technical.
Okay. Committee members, any questions? Okay, so do I have a motion?
We'll make the motion that Daniel just made.
That's
Approve it, and with the addition of the December 2nd memo, essentially.
December 2nd memo, and then the change
Then this change.
suggested today.
Okay.
Yep.
What was the date of that memo?
The date of that memo was December 22nd.
And that
Okay, so we have a motion to approve with those changes. Any additional discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Next up, we have Rule 25, P35, Rule 9.0, rule regarding the installation, construction, operation, aggregation of storage facilities. Mary Jo Poluski. That close enough?
Krolewski,
Sorry.
like a V instead of.
Is Jake Marin joining you also?
I'm scared.
In case she needs an assist, but I think she can handle it.
Okay, you're welcome to come up if you want to. Okay,
I think we're.
it's all yours.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mary Jo Krolewski. I'm with the Vermont Public Utility Commission, and I'm a utilities analyst with the commission. Today, we are submitting a new rule that governs energy storage facilities. The rule covers a couple of things, and it implements the provisions under 30 VSA sections 248U and sections 8011. The rule covers in sections 9.2 through 9.204 the interconnection, safety standards, and operation and aggregation of energy storage facilities in Vermont. And then the section 9.2 covers the decommissioning of energy storage facilities in Vermont. And the final section of the rule covers the siting of energy storage facilities in Vermont. And it essentially provides two areas of relief from some of the provisions that govern the siting of generation facilities in general under Section 248. And it essentially allows a more expedited siting of the facilities. The rule, we went through extensive commenting and draft before we submitted it with the Secretary of State. And this final version of this new rule that we're submitting we received a few comments after submitting with the Secretary of State, and the rule addresses those comments in its final version.
All set?
Yeah, I think so. If you have any questions.
Any members?
No. Okay.
Oh, yes, Representative.
So I have a few questions. It appears that Lcar had 5 suggestions, and I'm wondering if those were integrated into the final rule.
Yes, they were. Some of their suggestions had to do with the filing documents, the APA filing documents.
One of particular concern was where it says reduce the standards, clarify that adopt a more stringent standard. That's quite a difference from, what initially was, I guess, in number 12, but I'm glad to hear that. When you talk about the new rules for the storage facilities, in particular around safety, I'd like to have you address these battery facilities. There's been one that was just put in Troy, one of my towns. I know that Massachusetts has recently had a fire in a couple of their facilities. Fire chiefs in the area down there are not willing to support them because of the safety for their firefighters as well as the community in general. So I guess under safety, what additional safety measures have you considered in regards to location, let's say, to residential housing, as far as training for firefighters in the case of a fire at this facility and things like that? Is that addressed in this rule?
It is under Section 302. They have to comply with the, let me get the name of the division right here. The Division of Fire Safety, Vermont Fire and Building Safety Code, which governs the installations inside of buildings, public buildings. So,
Do you know if there's any additional training required? Because I know even when the wind towers went in Lowell, our local fire department had to have specialized training as to anything that happened up there on the mountain.
I am not aware that there's additional training that's required when one is like, what you're saying, when one's installed into a community. No, I'm not aware of that. My understanding is that the current safety standards govern some of that, but I am not aware of any additional training that people receive.
And I guess this is just a general comment, Mr. Chair. Lowell is, and the area up there is receiving a number of so-called renewable projects. Many of them a concern. This, just for general public information, this battery project up there was a $6 million project, $2 million from Vermont Electric Co-op, $2 million from Green Mountain Power, and $2 million from the feds. It's supposed to provide 600 and some homes with power for one day. I think that's, in my estimation, quite an extreme cost. I know that it was approved by the PUC, but again, I'm not convinced it was a cost that was legitimate to the ratepayers. So again, with the concerns that I have for the safety in particular, I'm not sure I can support the rule. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Other committee members?
Can I add that under the rule, the safety standards are reviewed as part of the citing process? That the applicant will address public safety when they file their permit for their certificate of public good. Just so that does get reviewed in the process.
I guess with that, I don't see that the standards are strict enough then, I guess, when I know that the facility in Troy is on Route 100 next to residential housing. So if that's the case, I think even stricter guidelines should be implemented through rule or whatever through the PUC.
I would suggest that the department respond to Representative Higley's concerns around, particularly around firefighter training. And copy that to the committee here, just so we have that information. Appreciate that. Other committee members? Is there a motion?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
for the motion, is it possible to get that memo, that safety response before we vote? Can we table it?
If the committee wishes to do that, we could postpone the vote till next.
Can I move that we postpone the vote until our next
Pending.
Lcar meeting, and then readdress the rule?
Or just get information around it.
Right, to allow 2 weeks to get information in regards to the safety concerns of Representative Higley.
Any discussion from committee members, thoughts, comments?
We're meeting next week, so.
Yeah, it'll be next week. It'll be next week, because they're carrying the neonatal rule over till next week, so,
Appreciate that.
okay.
And
So anyway, there's a motion to postpone the vote till next week, pending receiving information.
okay,
And all those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, then that's what we'll do.
and do you want us also to follow up with the Division of Fire Safety as well? Is that part of the?
You may have to, to get the proper answer. I mean, again, when I hear a fire chief in Massachusetts who just recently talked about, a thermal runaway, and I'm not putting my officers at risk. What does that mean? What is, and so I guess through fire and safety, whatever measures you need to come back with, whether or not that's been addressed, if so, how, that would be helpful.
I mean, they did participate in the rulemaking, the Division of Fire Safety. Yeah, okay, we can, okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, so next up is going to be Rule 25, P37, Risk Retention Group Holding Company Systems. Is it Russ McCracken?
Good morning, Russ McCracken, Assistant General Counsel from the Department of Financial Regulation, joining you via Zoom this morning. I'm presenting the updates to the department's Risk Retention Group Holding Company rule. I was before Lcar a few months ago with a rule update, making essentially the same changes to the department's traditional insurance holding company rule. In 2024, there was some updates and changes to the portion of the insurance company statute that addresses insurance holding company structures. And as part of that update, there were a couple of sections in the statute that called for the department to sort of fill in some gaps with rules. One was around exempting holding companies, including the RRGs, from certain filing requirements. And the other was to fill in certain terms that are required in management agreements for RRGs. The rule also provides some more clarity around one of the exemptions in the statute, a term that's used in the statute. And the rule provides some administrative changes and technical corrections, or the update provides some changes and corrections to the existing rule. The updates to the rule are based on a model rule and accreditation standards adopted by the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. And updating the department's rules is important to stay consistent with the NAIC's accreditation standards. The department didn't receive any public comments on the rule. And so I am happy to take any questions that you may have.
Committee members, questions, comments? I'm not seeing any, and I do not have any either. So please.
I move that we approve 25P037 Department of Financial Regulation Risk Retention Group Holding Company Systems.
Son of Weeks has put a motion on the table to approve the rule. Additional discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you for your time and consideration.
Okay, next up we have Rule 25, P36, Groundwater Protection Rule and Strategy. Matt Chapman. Hey, Matt.
Good morning.
All yours.
Thank you. So for the record, my name is Matt Chapman. I'm the Director of the Waste Management and Prevention Division, talking about the Groundwater Protection Rule and Strategy. I think it might be useful for me to just give a little regulatory framework and background of what's going on at the state and federal level with PFAS regulation, and then dive into the rule. I think as many of you know, PFAS is a forever chemical, meaning it doesn't break down once it gets into the environment, and it's basically very harmful at very low levels. We often call it an emerging contaminant because our understanding of it continues to evolve as the science evolves out in the sort of academic and research setting. And I think it's probably good to preface it as that science is, as we've learned more, PFAS is much more harmful than we thought it was even 10 years ago when we first started getting into this realm. So we started about 10 years ago. Our first groundwater standard was adopted 10 years ago. And since then, Vermont has been a leader basically trying to phase out PFAS from consumer products, regulating PFAS from other activities, and collaborating with other states to try and take regional approaches to in the absence of federal leadership. Thankfully, in 2024, EPA adopted a final PFAS standard for public drinking water systems, what was often referred to as a maximum contaminant level, or MCL. That standard's in place today, and the state has late last year adopted the drinking water standard for PFAS that exists at the federal level. And so you approved that, I believe, at the end of the last calendar year, right around the end of the last calendar year, and it's effective. This proposed rulemaking basically aligns what we did in the public water setting to what we do under the sort of private water supply and groundwater protection setting. And that's basically what the groundwater protection rule does. It is the rule that we use to basically, when we clean up contaminated sites, it's the standard we clean up those sites to. When we regulate sort of activities that may have an effect on groundwater, it's the regulatory sort of framework that we use to regulate those. So just going to the rule itself, there are basically three proposed changes that are in there. The first aligns the standard with the federal standard. So I'm not going to try and pronounce the chemical names for these contaminants, but it's basically what's HPFODA, which is commonly referred to as Gen X. We're adding that contaminant and then amending contaminants for PFHXS and PFNA. And our previous standard was 20 parts per trillion, and this moves it down to 10 parts per trillion. It used to be a cumulative standard. EPA has elected to go to individual standards, and we're following that. And with respect to PFOA and PFOS, which is what we normally see in Vermont, the standards are changing from 20 parts per trillion to 4 parts per trillion. In addition to that,
Just a question, just maybe to help clarify. You say cumulative standard. I understand that because I was around when that.
Sure.
Now, individual standard, how does that work?
So it used to, under the existing law,
you basically added what you saw in the environment. So it's the sum of, I believe it was 5 PFAS compounds, and if it was greater than 20, then you had standard violation. So it's actually two things this rule does. It sets up individual standards for each one of these contaminants, and then it also puts into place something called a hazard index, which is a slightly more complicated way of doing the same thing as the sort of additive standard that we had last time. So EPA took this approach where it's used in sort of health protection and other contexts where you basically add them together, but they're at sort of ratios. And if the ratios equate to something greater than 1, you have a standard violation. So it does both in this rulemaking, but it does it for the 5 compounds that are listed here. So the other change that is proposed in this rule is regulating PFAS from on-site wastewater, indirect discharge, and stormwater. It doesn't lend itself to sort of the traditional numeric application of a standard that we use in sort of, I'm going to call it more intensive regulatory contexts. So we've exempted them from several of the requirements in the rule and told them that they need to go and basically address within their individual rules how they're going to deal with PFAS management. And so, I mean, I think the short term is that the simplest thing that we basically told people to do is that the strategy is to reduce what we have in consumer products, educate people who basically are using septic systems or are at like sort of indirect discharges or basically large septic systems, tell them how to reduce the sorts of things that cause an impact to those systems and potentially a release. And then lastly, identify industrial codes, SICs, of high-risk industries and basically move them into a higher category of regulatory activity. And that's sort of what we plan to do with those entities, but it's not done in this rule. And then the last change is to make a minor change to where we have compliance points for contaminated sites. It basically acknowledges sometimes we put the compliance point on one side of the road and we can move it to the other side of the road because frankly, no one's drilling a drinking water well in the middle of the road. So trying to acknowledge that sort of reality. And that is in sum what the rule is. We had 2 comments, one asking us not to make these changes at this time, one asking us to go further than we had proposed to go. I think with not going and doing anything, I think the concern is there are a number of Vermonters that are impacted by PFAS, and both the Department of Environmental Conservation and Health are concerned with sort of the no action alternative in this place. It's hard to tell these individuals that even though we know that there's a risk, we're not going to do anything about it. And with respect to going further, I mean, we evaluated that option, but there is significant value in regulatory consistency between what EPA, the state public drinking water program is doing in this context and the groundwater rule. And we think it makes sense in this case to have that consistency.
Mr. Chair.
I saw this and I'll get you. Okay, go ahead.
The new EPA guidelines, how much are they driven by health risks and how much are they driven by the limits of technology for detection?
So it's both. I mean, I think it's fair to say the EPA standard acknowledges, I guess I should say the impacts to people from PFOA and PFOS specifically are likely lower than what we've established the standards at. But I think that from the limits of testing technology and other aspects, EPA made a decision to establish the standard at 4. And I think we've looked at that, evaluated that, and think it's a reasonable place to land based on sort of the work that EPA did in their rulemaking.
So that's it.
So no weeks.
Just curious, you said you had 2 sets of feedback, one that requested or recommended not doing anything. What's the rationale offered by that party?
Well, I mean, I think the rationale was effectively there's ongoing litigation and at least comments by EPA that they're going to make a change at some point in the future. And But, again, I think from the agency's perspective, EPA has been making those comments since the new administration has come into office, so for about a year, and no affirmative regulatory action has been taken to this point. And I think that when we look at the work that was done by EPA under the 2024 rule, we think it's defensible and it serves as a strong basis for Vermont moving forward. And then we'll continue to monitor everything that takes place in the regulatory context and can make a change if it warrants a change.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Couple questions. When do these standards go into effect?
They will go into effect.
When would the actual adoption of
Yeah, they will go into effect 30 days after the sort of, we're going to immediately file and then make them effective. Yes.
And I guess the second part of that question is, I read through the economic analysis, and it seems to me there's a greater impact than what I'm reading there. Or disabuse me of that notion.
Well, I mean, it's always hard for agencies to try and speculate on what the economic impact of things like this are. We know that there are around 300 private water supplies that are impacted by PFAS that aren't being addressed at this point because the standard, they basically are between 4 parts per trillion and 20 parts per trillion and we know that there's an adverse health effect. They're not being affected. I think from most of the areas that are sort of in the PFAS regulatory structure, if you have a PFAS problem, your problems normally exist at concentrations much higher than 4 parts per trillion. And what we've tried to do was to take those, what we would call sort of, I'm going to call them as probably a bad passive receivers, things like septic systems and indirect discharge systems and stormwater systems, where things, because we use PFAS in the environment, they're ending up in those systems. We've acknowledged we have to treat them different, right? Like we have to move them out of sort of our traditional regulatory structure and into a different regulatory structure. And I guess what you're not seeing here is that there's a lot of work going on within the agency on the implementation front to try and soften the landing of this rule to make sure that there are grant programs, education programs, and other programs out there to basically help people through the transition of its implementation. But I don't know that it's going to have sort of this broad, wide-ranging impact. I think most of the people who are going to have to address PFAS issues are not sort of in the between 20 and 4. They're normally over 20 when they come into our system.
Other comments, questions? Representative.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to follow up on that, you talk about the 20 parts per trillion and down to 4 parts. Is that an EPA guideline as well?
It is, yes. I mean, let me actually reframe that. EPA never adopted the 20. That was a Vermont specific. The 4 is an EPA standard.
Say that one more time.
Okay. So Vermont was ahead of EPA, right? So we adopted a standard before EPA had taken any action, and we adopted that 20 part per trillion standard. EPA I guess it's now 2 years ago, adopted a federal standard, and the 4 parts per trillion is a part of that federal standard. So we acted before they acted, but their standard is the lower standard.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
One more. But going back to your comment about 300 known private water sources.
Yes.
Private owners, not public municipalities, not.
So public drinking water supplies are handled under another rule, right? So the public community water system rule that came in through Lcar several months ago, Ben Montrose was the presenter on that rule, went through and detailed how public water systems are going to be addressed. And it's a completely different process, right? And the implementation, there is a much longer sort of implementation tail on that process. So it's sort of phased in. And again, I think there's I'm aware, but not deeply familiar with all the elements of it, but that it's a very different construct than what we're talking about here, though the standards are the same. The numeric standards are the same.
Do those 300 owners know that this?
I mean, I think a lot of them do. A lot of them, frankly, are folks that we're dealing with in Senator Baumgart's district where they're impacted. And then there are others, frankly, there are others in the like Killington area where we have PFAS contamination. So I think most of them are aware and, you know, we've been moving to try to address them. But I mean, what this really does is where there are places where we know who is responsible, we can now turn to those individuals and say that they have an obligation to take affirmative action to remediate the problems that they've caused.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Other members?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
brief, quickly, I do have a concern about, Senator Baumgart's area, you're aware of something that's happened. But I mean, I know of an incident up my way in a town that had issues with their well. They drilled another well. They had issues. It was found in their septic system. It was found in the store down below it. It was linked, wasn't even linked to anything in particular in a sense, except they came up with maybe it was the janitor of the school dumping the wax solution out into the yard.
Mm-hmm.
I know for a fact that this town is strapped with, the cost of trying to remediate this. So I guess, I just, for us, it's similar to the PCB issue. We start out with these stricter standards than the federal government. Of course, in this case, you said not. Well, we were for a while, but now we're in line with the EPA. I think that's all well and good, but boy, where's the money going to come from to remediate this? And again, you said there's a known entity that has polluted over the years. But again, if it's a school, how does that work? How are we going to help these communities out with this issue?
So, I mean, I think, again, looking at, I think I know the situation you're talking about, and there is in the context of areas where we have a public water supply. I mean, again, we're now straddling between what this rule addresses and what the previous rule addressed, that they are a part of the department's like more global strategy. But we have funding available for public water supplies who have emerging contaminant issues, which is what this is, to help deal with the impacts of these issues. I mean, I think our approach up to this point has largely been to try to identify who's impacted and make sure that we stop that impact, right? So it's figure out how far this contamination has gone and make sure that the people who have been impacted are receiving safe drinking water so they're not being exposed, whether that be through a treatment system on their private water supply, fixing a public water supply, or providing them bottled water in the interim while we sort of work things through. So, I mean, I think there's a set of comprehensive strategies to try and help people navigate their way through addressing and PFAS-related issues. There are certainly tools available to towns, but I mean, I do think I'm not going to say you're incorrect, right? Like we are going to ask people who have impacted groundwater to figure out where the impacts are at and how far it's gone and how you can make sure people in the community aren't being exposed to those. And that is something. It's something that we do, and it's a part of the mission of the department.
Okay, thanks for that. Appreciate it.
Any other comments? Is there a motion?
I'll move that we approve 25P036 groundwater protection rule and strategy.
Weeks has put a motion on the table to approve the rule. Any additional discussion? Saying none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thanks, Matt. Next up, we have Rule 25, P31. It's special practice. We are really, I did that right. article seeds and neonate pesticides. Because of the timing of our agenda today, although the tension around this rule and some of the issues that have surfaced both from statutory concerns and also some legislative intent concerns, I thought it would be best for the committee and in my discussion with members of this committee to have Michael Grady, who's the subject matter expert on this area and plus is involved with the legislation, to give the committee a rundown of the piece of legislation that passed, which ended up being Act 182. And then at next meeting next week, which will be the 15th, we'll have the agency present the rule. And then we have other parties and stakeholders that are interested in also providing testimony. We'll hear it at that time. And then the committee will have a larger conversation, discussion around the rule. Okay. So with that, Michael Grady.
Good morning. Michael Grady with Legislative Council. As the chair just summarized for you, he asked me to prepare an overview of Act 182, which is the statutory authority, enabling authority for the rule proposed by the Agency of Agriculture. But before we get to that rule, or that Act 182, I think you need background because this subject matter has evolved over time and it's not the most intuitive subject matter, especially when you're talking about treated articles. So Act 182 evolved effectively over the past 10 years as Vermont and other jurisdictions enacted laws to regulate treated articles and treated article seeds and neonicotinoid pesticides. Now, the US EPA establishes standards under something called FIFRA, the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, for the use of pesticides. But FIFRA doesn't control all regulation of pesticides. States have considerable authority to regulate the use and sale of pesticides. But a treated article is not a pesticide. So a treated article is defined by EPA as an article or substance treated with or containing a pesticide. So it's not a pesticide itself, it's treated with or contains a pesticide to protect the article or substance itself. For example, paint treated with a pesticide to protect the paint coating, or wood products treated to protect the wood against insect or fungus infestation, if the pesticide is registered for such use. So I'll give you some examples of treated articles. Telephone poles, your shoes with antimicrobial properties, your t-shirt that has insect resistance. Those are all treated articles. So when they are sold outside of the state where they're manufactured, they're not regulated as a pesticide. But when they are manufactured and the pesticide is applied to the product, that's where it is regulated. So in commerce, article is not regulated as a pesticide. When it's manufactured, it is regulated in that process. Now, because of the EPA FIFRA exemption, most states do not regulate treated articles, but the FIFRA exemption does not preempt or prevent states from regulating treated articles. And in 2015, Vermont became the first state to allow for the comprehensive regulation of treated articles when it enacted Act number 99, an act relating to regulation of treated article pesticide. Act number 99 authorized the Agency of Agriculture, upon the recommendation of the predecessor to the Agriculture Innovation Board, the Pesticide Advisory Council, upon the recommendation of the Pesticide Advisory Council, AAFM, the Agency of Ag, could adopt best management practices, standards, procedures, and requirements. So 4 different categories: BMP, standards, procedures, and requirements related to the sale, use, storage, or disposal of treated articles that will have a hazardous, long-term deleterious effect on the environment. Now, Act number 99 included discretionary authority for the agency to adopt those rules because, well, frankly, nobody else was doing it. No one else, no state elsewhere in the country was regulating treated articles. Vermont was the first. And there was considerable anxiety from some of the regulated, potentially regulated entities, most specifically the telecom industry, because of their telephone poles. And they're like, what would we do if you regulated our treated wood telephone poles? We might have to go to metal poles. And so they had considerable anxiety about the potential for the rule. And therefore, the committees at that time decided to make the authority discretionary and not mandatory. But the agency did not enact rules under Act number 99 to regulate treated articles. But during that time, over the last 10 years, there's been growing concern and evidence that neonicotinoid pesticides might contribute or do contribute to the harm to pollinator species and to public health in general. And in other jurisdictions, the European Union, Canada, Canadian provinces, the use of neonicotinoid pesticides or treated articles treated with neonicotinoid pesticides have been regulated and in some instances have been banned. That led in 2022 to the Vermont General Assembly enacting Act number 145, requiring the Agency of Agriculture in consultation with the Agriculture Innovation Board, which in that time period had replaced the Pesticide Advisory Council, to adopt by rule BMPs for the use in the state of neonicotinoid treated article seeds. In developing those rules, the agency was directed to address certain factors. And you can see what those factors are. I didn't when I included in the bulleted point, but it's attached to the end of this document. You'll see Act 145 and the directive to what the secretary is supposed to address in the BMPs. They're supposed to address establishment of threshold levels of pest pressure, availability of non-treated article seeds that are not neonicotinoid treated article seeds, economic impact from crop loss, relative toxicities of different neonicotinoid treated article seeds, surveillance and monitoring techniques for infield pest pressure, ways to reduce pest harborage, and criteria for approval of neonicotinoid treated article seeds. So that was 2022, and the agency did come forward with proposed BMPs and brought them to the General Assembly for review in 2024. But in 2024, H706 was introduced that would ban the use of neonicotinoid pesticides in certain instances and ban the use of neonicotinoid treated article seeds. And that was largely in response to two things. The committees had learned that Quebec had banned neonicotinoid treated article seeds and had done so for a significant period of time and had no real consequences from that. And New York had just passed a law that would ban certain uses of neonicotinoid pesticides and the use of neonicotinoid treated article seed. And so because of those two facts, the knowledge that the committees learned about those two actions, they moved forward with a bill to ban neonicotinoid treated article seeds and certain uses of neonicotinoid pesticides. So the agency never adopted a rule based on the 2022 Act because they were watching you, the General Assembly, look at a bill that would have required other requirements by rule or other standards by rule or other BMPs by rule. And so they didn't adopt the BMPs that they brought to you in 2024. They are bringing you the BMPs that are before you today. And those are based on Act 182. And so in the overview document I gave you, there's a section by section summary of Act 182. I'm not going to focus on all the sections. I'm not going to focus on all the detail in the section by section overview. I'm going to hit the high points and ultimately come to the section that requires the best management practices. So section 1 was the finding section laying out the harm that neonicotinoid pesticides pose, the fact that the EU and Canadian provinces have banned their use, and the fact that the New York General Assembly had just passed legislation prohibiting certain treated article seed sales and prohibiting certain neonicotinoid pesticide use. There was a definitions chapter. The key ones were neonicotinoid treated article seed and neonicotinoid pesticide, which the General Assembly had already adopted previously in 2022 and in 2015. And then you come to section 3. That was a prohibition beginning January 1, 2029, prohibiting a person from selling, offering for sale, or use, distributing, or using any neonicotinoid treated article seed for soybeans or for any crop in the cereal grains crop group. And I have the cereal grains crop rule with me if you would like to see it. It's about 80 pages long. It's actually the crop rule for all crops, not just for cereal grains. And then the secretary, after consultation with ANR, may issue written exemptions to suspend prohibition on the use of neonicotinoid treated article seeds in certain situations, according to a certain procedure, and with a written exemption order that will be posted to the General Assembly's website, and that the Secretary of Ag could rescind at any time. So I'm not going to go through the details of the exemption order process, but it is laid out for you in the summary document I provided. So that was the prohibition on treated article seeds 2029, but there was an exemption process that you could utilize if you met the conditions for that exemption. Now, section 4 of Act 182 was a prohibition on the use of neonicotinoid pesticides. So beginning July 1, 2025, the following uses of neonicotinoid pesticides, so not a treated article, an actual pesticide, prohibited the outdoor application of the neonicotinoid pesticide to any crop during bloom, outdoor application of neonics to soybeans or any crop in the cereal grains crop group, outdoor applications of neonics to crops in the leafy vegetable, brassica, bulb, vegetables, herbs and spices, and stalk, stem, and leaf crop groups, and then the application of neonic pesticides to ornamental plants. Again, there was an exemption process and mirrored the exemption process that the secretary could implement for treated article seeds. It was the same basic standard. You have to meet the standards. You have to go through some training. There was ability for the secretary to rescind that exemption, and that exemption order would be posted to the General Assembly's website. There was a conforming amendment in section 5 of 182. I'm not going to go through that. It's too wonky. And then section 6 is really the key part of what you're looking at today. That was a directive that the Secretary of Agriculture amend that previous requirement for best management practices. Remember the 2022 requirement, that they would amend that as part of what they were going to do for best management practices. You amended what they would address, and you directed them to adopt best management practices. Remember when in 2015 you said best managed practices, standards, et cetera, requirements, but here you just said best management practices. And that they would be available after July 1, 2025 for the use of neonicotinoid pesticides that would continue to be allowed, because you're going to allow some use of neonicotinoid pesticides that are not regulated by Act 182. You're going to allow some use of neonicotinoid pesticides under a written exemption order. So in those situations, when you're using a neonicotinoid pesticide, or prior to 2029, the use of treated article seeds that are not subject to prohibition until 2029, best management practices for the use of those treated article seeds. And when I say treated article seeds in the context of 182, I mean neonicotinoid treated article seeds. Because frankly, most seeds are treated articles anyway, because most seeds get treated for fungicide, because fungus is one of the main ways that seeds are destroyed. So your garden probably has fungicidal treated article seeds in it. And to just, when I'm talking about treated article seeds, I'm not talking about all treated article seeds. I'm talking about neonic treated article seeds. So one kind of not unique, but fairly unusual aspect of 182 is it's contingent on action in other states. First, there's a contingent repeal in Section 8 of Act 182 that provides that the Vermont prohibitions on the use of neonicotinoid treated seeds or treated article seeds or pesticides would be repealed if the similar provisions in New York were repealed. There is concern that without New York, the seed dealers, the seed market is not going to provide the necessary treated article seeds or necessary untreated seeds to Vermont in 2029. So New York's corn crop is 10 times, if not more, than so that is why the contingent repeal was added. New York is going to drive, hopefully, the seed market to provide those necessary seeds that are neonicotinoid untreated or untreated neonicotinoid seeds. And it's similarly, the effective dates for the prohibitions on both neonicotinoid pesticides and neonicotinoid treated article seeds were dependent on New York's statutes going into effect, which they have. So what you're left with is looking at the actual section in 182 that required the BMPs and whether or not there was the intent for those BMPs to be mandatory or discretionary. The Legislative Council generally doesn't opine on legislative intent because A, we're not legislators, and B, different legislators have different intent. So if I said your intent was this, some other legislator might say, no, that was never my intent. And my intent was X, not Y. And so we don't get involved with that. We raise that issue for you, but we don't make a conclusion or recommendation one way or the other. Both sides have colorable arguments here under the law, under the language. Best management practices, unless otherwise stated, are generally voluntary requirements. But there are best management practices in statute that are required and are mandatory. And you have to look at this language and determine whether or not you intended it to be mandatory or discretionary. That's really the crux of the issue. There's another issue in that the rule as proposed is discretionary. And it says should, and it says a person should not dispose of, or a person should not apply. Well, there are other laws that are applicable to disposal. There are other laws that are applicable to application. And it was in part confusing when I read it, or I could see how it could confuse a user that, oh, I should not dispose of my discarded pesticide or treated article seeds in a wetland, but that doesn't say I shall not. Whereas elsewhere in law, several places, you shall not dispose of waste in a wetland, or you shall not dispose of waste in a place that's not permitted for disposal of waste. So I raised that question that it created an ambiguity. the agency has responded with some language. It's basically in the overview, the introduction of their rule. Maybe it was not something that I would have proposed, but I think it addresses the issue. And so that's that second issue about statutory authority. You know, leaving it up to the committee whether or not you think it addresses the issue. And then the second issue is the first issue I spoke of is the legislative intent, whether or not the BMP should be mandatory or discretionary. Now, when I'm going to leave that the last thing. I want Damien to opine on that as well. So.
Yeah, we're bumping up against other committee time and stuff like that. So, Michael, I really appreciate your time to do this. I think it's helpful for the committee to hear this presentation. Time for a few questions here. We'll also have Mike next week. So, but Carol, go ahead.
Maybe thinking about this between now and then. If you were to go back to the committee tapes and see if there's a discussion about the word should, wouldn't you have a discussion? Wouldn't someone have had that discussion?
So I have tried to do that up until the committee tapes. I have gone through the record. I've looked at my notes. I've looked at all of the summaries that I did of the discussions. And I cannot conclude one way or the other what the committee would intend. I think you are correct that if I went to the committee tapes, I could potentially find that, but you can't just, there's no index to the committee tapes that will indicate where that discussion was. I would have to listen to hours of tape.
What if AI could do it?
We're not allowed to use AI right now.
So I'll think about this.
So
So typically we ask committee chairs for intent, whether a rule meets intent. In this case, do we have a written?
we don't have anything written from either chair, Senate and or House chair. I have spoken to the House chair and I can share that with committee members during the next week. I'll see you in the hallway and I'll.
I mean, just to kind of folks are right down to should or shall and what's.
Yeah, I think what Senator Weeks is getting at is that we always ask committee chairs to sort of weigh in on rules that come before us. It tends not to be an issue if they respond or don't respond unless it's controversial. And then when it's controversial, it's useful, very useful to have committee chair. But I will follow up to make sure that we have something definitive from both chairs before next.
Thanks.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? Next week. All right, meeting next week, Thursday. I believe you're the ag folks. Appreciate you being here.
No.
And thanks, everyone. We'll see you next week at 8 o'clock. By the way, Lindsay, is there other rules